Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for a group living town hall update that we have with the group living project manager, Andrew Webb. Andrew, thank you for joining us tonight. This process has been going on for several years and it got slowed down at City Council, and we have been getting briefings at our Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee. And I just wanted to make sure that we gave the opportunity to present the information that's been being presented to City Council to my constituents. We did an Ask a Planner in late August with Andrew, and we weren't able to do it Facebook Live. We weren't that savvy yet, but now we are doing this on Facebook Live, and we will also upload it to our YouTube video, and then I will also put it in my December newsletter so that we can have those who are not able to join us this evening watch the video. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of a different type of agenda. We're going to section this off into two different sections. Andrew will go over one section, and then we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll go over another section and do a Q&A. We decided to do it that way. We had a update yesterday at LUTI, which is short for Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure, and it worked really well instead of having to sit through a whole entire presentation and wait to ask questions. So with that, Andrew, I'll hand it over to you. And thanks again for joining us. And for those joining us on Facebook, you can put your questions in the chat and we will ask them to Andrew. And for those who are also attending, you can use the chat function to ask us any questions, or you can use the raise your hand function, and I'll promote you to a panelist when we get to the Q&A question part, so you can ask your question directly to us. And with that, take it away, Andrew. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Councilwoman Sandoval. Again, Andrew Webb. I work for Community Planning and Development, and I've been the project manager for the last coming up on 3 years now. This project to update the Denver Zoning Code's residential regulations. Just to quickly recap the agenda for tonight, I will, in this first section, give a brief background of the whole project, and then I'll talk a little bit about the regulations for households, the regulations in the zoning code for how many people can live together, basically. And then we'll pause for some Q&A there, and then I'll in the second part I'll talk about residential care uses. So we can, as the Councilwoman said, we can break this up a little bit and not have just one big long presentation. So just as a real quick overview, this is a proposed set of amendments to the Denver Zoning Code's regulations for all residential uses. We're doing this for several reasons. One is that the the current regulations present obstacles for the establishment of much needed facilities for residential facilities for our most vulnerable populations, and simply from people sharing housing in common household scenarios that exist in cities all over the world. This, as is the case with many text amendments to the zoning code, is an effort to further move away from regulations that are rooted in the exclusion that was common in zoning codes, especially right after the Second World War, and some of the language goes back to the 1940s and 50s. We know we need a more equitable approach for locating residential care uses and to allow people to share housing costs as we face a housing crisis in the city. And we also need to fix a lot of long-known problems with the zoning code, including outdated or unclear language that no longer corresponds to the way people actually, the way residential care facilities actually work, for example. And because of many years of layered amendments and additions to the code, an unpredictable permitting and notification system. And so we're proposing a new system that would cover all residential care uses. So the role of the zoning code is to govern the use of private land, and it's one of several documents and sets of regulations that guide decisions about what to do with land. The zoning code establishes the zone districts, or essentially to the areas of the city where certain uses are permitted. It sets forth basic requirements for transitions and spacing between uses, basic requirements for building form and site design, like pedestrian access, the location of parking relative to building frontages, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the basic structural requirements, the maximum heights, transparency of buildings, that sort of thing. Other regulations that also govern land uses but will not be changed as part of this include the revised municipal code, which has all the basic standards for maintenance of housing, maintenance of yards and exterior facades, that sort of thing. The municipal code sets forth the requirements for the operation of rooming houses, community corrections facilities, that sort of thing. There are also, outside of the city code, there are licensing requirements at the federal and state level for many types of uses, such as assisted living, for example. And the city also licenses some facilities, including rooming and boarding and community corrections. And then finally, the city's building and fire code set forth the basic life safety standards, requirements for smoke alarms and egress windows in sleeping areas, that sort of thing. And these documents are not changing as a part of this set of text amendments to the zoning code. So in this first discussion, I'll talk a little bit about household size, and I'll just want to clarify up front here that we're only talking about adults over the age of 18. The city doesn't regulate how many children can live in a house, and we don't propose to. That is not something that municipalities typically do, and there are preclusions from doing so in the Federal Fair Housing Act, for example. So right now, the zoning code regulates housing differently, depending on whether it is a detached house or an attached house of some sort. So in a single detached home, the code currently permits two unrelated adults to live together with unlimited relatives. And there are currently, I should note, no off-street parking requirements. In duplexes and apartments and essentially everything else besides typical detached houses, the code allows for unrelated adults to live together, again, with unlimited adult relatives. This is one of the issues that we are seeking to fix as part of this project. The code basically says if you are not a family related by blood, if you're a group of people who choose to live together, chosen family, that sort of thing, the only option you have are in apartments or duplexes and multi-unit uses, which are on average half the size of the city's detached housing stock. So the proposal that was approved by the planning board in August would allow up to 5 adults of any relationship with unlimited relatives to each to live in any dwelling unit. Would allow also have a provision for more unrelated adults in dwelling units that are larger than the median Denver house structure size of 1,600 square feet to a maximum of 10. And it would establish a new minimum off-street parking requirement for those larger household groups. So as I mentioned, we currently don't require any off-street parking for single unit houses. The proposal as it came out of planning board and was sent to the city council would allow, would have a minimum off-street parking requirement of 1 or 2 spaces for detached houses with 6 or more adults. So as Councilwoman Sandoval mentioned, we have been meeting with the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Subcommittee. That is a committee of the City Council that considers all land use matters before they go before the full council for a public hearing. And over several months, we have been really digging into the details about some of these proposals, understanding and hearing about some of the concerns that council members are hearing from their constituents, and looking at some potential revisions to the proposals that might address those concerns. And this shows, generally based on what we've heard from city council members to date, where we think we're probably headed, to a system that would retain the current allowance for unlimited relatives to live together. So currently there is no limit on the number of family members that could live together, and that would not change. And then would also allow as another type of household, a household that is up to a certain number of unrelated adults or adults of mixed relationship. And so essentially, if you're a family related by blood, you would have no limit to the number of people who could live in a household. But if it is a household of people who are not related or mixed, then we believe that we're probably going to land somewhere around between 4 and 6 total adults allowed in that house. We are also still continuing to talk to council members about the option for allowing more people to live in a larger house structure. There are a lot of very large multi-bedroom houses in Denver that people could otherwise safely choose to live in or to house people in, but that would require some system or provision by which for every 200 square feet over the 1,600 square foot median house size, one additional adult up to some maximum number. So we're still having those discussions with council members as a possible addition to the alternative that we think we're zeroing in on. So just to highlight a few of the shared values that we've heard during these city council discussions, there is support for allowing blended families, allowing 2 families to live together or unrelated adults to live as a household without some sort of special permit. And there is support for some flexibility and not trying to regulate who is and who is not a family. But I will note that there is still concern that large groups of people who are not related by blood, there's a concern among some community members and council members that those are not desirable uses in neighborhoods. Or could cause problems in neighborhoods. What we've heard is that it's really the external impacts of those larger houses, additional parking, that sort of thing, that seem to really matter. And there is agreement that among council members that there should be some limit, definitely on the number of unrelated adults allowed to live in a household. And in some cases, we've heard suggestion for a limit on related adults who can live together, especially in the blended household scenarios that I just talked about. And then finally, everybody seems to agree that whatever regulations we land on should be simple to understand and enforce. So with that, I will pause here and be glad to hear your questions and provide more detail at your request.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I want to go ahead and I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Naomi Grunditz, and I'm an aide for Councilwoman Sandoval and focus on land use and planning issues. I'm the admin host for this webinar, and I'll also help be moderating it a little bit. So we do have one question that's popped up already in the chat, and it's about children. So maybe if you could talk a little bit, Andrew, about that children aren't in these calculations that we're seeing, and how children under 18 basically play into this, and maybe there might be some intricacies actually about, when a person does technically become not a child when they're an adult at 18, if that might play into how we're thinking about these things.
Yeah, thanks for that. So there are the Federal Fair Housing Act essentially precludes cities from regulate and landlords and homeowners associations in most cases from regulating children in housing. Typically, the case law has shown that cities can regulate adults, but regulating children is not a common practice. And so, as is currently the case, the code speaks specifically to people who are 18 and older, and that is the current case in the code, and that would not change. So, in any of these scenarios, currently or as proposed, there is no limit on the number of children that can live in a household in the zoning code.
Great, thank you so much. We've got, oh yes, also as Councilman Sandoval has noted in the chat, if you want to ask a question in real time, you're welcome to. You can raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to read some questions out from that we're getting in the chat. So the next question is, will there be a study on how this might impact future attempts to contain pandemics? We've seen that obviously living together in a household has been difficult in this pandemic. So any thoughts or future considerations about that? I imagine some of those would not be related to zoning. They would be related to the Department of Health, both the city and kind of state responses to these type of things.
Yes, and I'm glad that somebody asked that. Though we have worked closely with the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, and to make sure that we were all in agreement. At the the overarching goal is to ensure people are able to attain and retain housing, and we also know that households of related and unrelated people can have practices at home that limit the spread of illnesses. Our priority in the zoning code is to make sure that the code is not an obstacle for people living together in ways that are fairly common. And we believe and DDPHE agreed that there isn't really it's not true that a household of unrelated people is automatically more likely to have more transmission of viruses than a household of unrelated people or of related people. I will say that some of the revisions that we're proposing from the original proposal that went to planning board do reflect a general concern that we've heard from council members about overcrowding, and that is why we think we're kind of zeroing in on a proposed approach that would set some limit on the number of people who could live in a household where not everybody is related. But moving forward, we certainly will continue as we, if these changes are adopted to the zoning code, we're putting together a post-adoption monitoring system that would track many metrics related to these regulations to ensure that we didn't have unintended consequences. And we'll certainly work with DDPHE to see if they are tracking any increases or changes like that, just like we will also track household size and makeup in general moving forward to ensure that we're essentially in line with our expectations.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And yes, that's a good thing to point out. Again, for those who are just joining us right now via Facebook Live or in the Zoom, the way that we're breaking out this conversation is we're doing a section on the household definition and then doing Q&A. And then we're going to talk about residential care and then do Q&A. And then at the very end, again, Andrew's going to be describing kind of what the next steps are. So if something is going to be addressed under those, we kindly ask that you hold those questions until those sections. And I do believe, Andrew, you have a slide, I think, talking about that tracking and metrics that will be measured going into that is at least being discussed about. But that is a part of how they're thinking about moving forward.
Yeah, and we do have a set of slides that sort of walk through the proposed metrics we're looking at, and they are on our website, but they're not in this particular deck. But I can certainly close this out and pull them up if anybody would like to talk more about them later in the evening.
Thank you. Maybe you could send those or put them in the chat. If there's a link, you could just copy and put it in the chat. Great, thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna keep moving down here. And also for anyone who is listening in purely via phone, I think we might have at least one person there. You can raise your hand by pressing *9. And if I see that, then I will let you all know and tell you how to unmute yourself, and we'll call you that way. So if you are on the phone, you can participate as well. All right, so the next question I think is something that we've seen a lot. I think it's about, what maybe the max possibilities of people living together versus what maybe more realistically what we will see. So say, for example, you're one of 7 siblings, got a big family. This means that you could technically have 58 people related to you by blood and marriage living in one house. Is that true?
That is currently true. Yes, any number of siblings and their family members could live together now.
Mm-hmm. However, that would have to be a pretty large house, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, and people typically choose houses that meet their needs. Although there is not, Denver does not have a minimum number of square feet per person requirement in a house. So, technically speaking, a large family could live in a studio apartment if they chose to, as long as it had smoke alarms and a basic functioning kitchen, bathroom, and heating.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about so currently, yes, if you have a large family, you could have 58 people living in a house right now. How many people do we normally see right now living together?
I'm going to skim way forward here to a slide that kind of compares some other cities, but the average Denver, my deck froze. The average household size in Denver is 2.31. And we've looked at, other cities and eventually here, I'm going to pull up a slide that shows this. We've looked at other cities that, here we go. We've looked at other cities that allow more unrelated adults to live together. And we've also talked to colleagues in those cities to better understand how those regulations have played out there. And I will note that none of these cities have actually made such a change recently. All of these cities have allowed more unrelated people to live together as a household for decades. And so we don't have any recent cities that we can point to that have made this change. But what we have learned is that the way people live together in cities that have much more flexible regulations than Denver appears to be generally the same as they do here, which is an average household size of around 2.5 people. And we've not seen or heard anecdotally that changing these regulations would suddenly result in a number of a change in household size in cities. So even though the code currently allows very large families to live together in Denver, and there are a handful of households that have 8 or 10 related adults living in them, on average household sizes are fairly small here and in most cities. But we acknowledge that there are needs for larger households, and certainly there's a full range on either side of that average for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, and thank you so much for that. Another question: what kind of studies or discussions with other departments like water and infrastructure about how increasing the number of people that can live together might impact our services, such as water, sewers, trash, etc.?
Yeah. So with all zoning code amendments and even map amendments, we work closely with all of the other departments within the city, including DOTI and wastewater, even the engineers within community planning and development who review new development proposals. Have all reviewed this, and we've not heard any indications that they are concerned that allowing more unrelated people to live together would have a substantial would result in a substantial change in the way people live together, or B, impact sewer or water infrastructure.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm going to actually go ahead. So these questions and a couple more have come in from Diane, and she's raised her hand. I'm going to just unmute you, Diane. I'm going to just let you elaborate on the couple of questions that you've asked, including that one. So bear with me as I figure out how to do that. All right, I'm going to allow you to talk. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. I am unmuted.
There you go.
Okay. Are you referring specifically to the wastewater and trash sewers question? Hello?
Andrew?
Yeah, well, I think you had asked, or had you asked
Yes, I
that in the
asked
chat?
that about that. And what about trash? You don't see as an adverse effect from that either?
No, because
So you're allowing more people to live together in a smaller, well, in a concentrated space. You
Mhm.
don't think increased water usage is going to have an impact in an area of the country that has undergone 4 severe droughts in the last 25 years that I know of? I know Denver is having a hard time now with its sewer systems and trying to maintain them. Wastewater, I understand, is in good shape to handle any increase in wastewater with more toilets being flushed. But what about the trash pickup in Denver? I'm sorry, but you put more people in a house, you get more trash. Are they gearing up to take care of that?
I'm going to interject, and you've asked several questions, so I'm going to let Andrew talk and answer them right now, and then you can ask another one. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I think the overarching answer to that is that we are proposing to allow more unrelated people to live together as a household,
Right.
but we're not proposing to allow generally more people to live together, because that is already allowed if people are related. So you can already have a very large household of people who are related. And when we look at the data in other places that allow more unrelated people to live together as part of the makeup of a household, we see that has not actually resulted in general in larger households. People tend to live together in the same size groups, whether they're related or unrelated. But we also know that there are plenty of scenarios of perhaps families that want to buy or rent a house together and share it, or 2 people who, or 3 people or 4 people who simply want to live together as a functioning family unit. And we don't believe that those will reflect a sudden change or growth in the actual average size of households in Denver, although it's something we'll certainly be monitoring afterwards to see how that changed. And we do believe that the current trash system can handle a small change in household makeup in the city.
Great, thanks so much. So let's see.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, why don't you
Okay,
go?
good. Okay, so my next question is, currently in the city of Denver, you can obtain a permit for 5 unrelated adults in a household. Why are we changing this?
I'm not sure what permit you're referring to, but it is possible right now to get what's called a home occupation permit for rooming and boarding, to have 1 roommate in a single unit house. So you can have 1 unrelated person.
I have a nephew that lived in a house of 5, and
Diane, I'm going to ask once again that we have a respectful discourse. So Andrew is the expert in this field, and I have been a council aide before I was a council person. And the rule in Denver is there's 2 unrelated people, and you can get a permit, just as Andrew mentioned, and you can get a permit to have 3 unrelated people living in your house. Now, your nephew may have lived in a house that had 5 people. It was not permitted. So if you have another question, I will absolutely allow you that to ask, but we have other panelists or other people in the chat who have other questions. So we answered your question, so please continue.
okay. If you put this into practice, as a now unstated number of unrelated adults and families, and you find that the unintended consequences are really not feasible for the city of Denver, how do you plan to walk this back?
Sure. So, as is the case with most of the text amendments that we propose to the city council, and we do perform post-adoption monitoring. And for this particular set of amendments, the planning board did ask for a robust system of ensuring that we've not had unintended consequences moving forward. And we'll report after a year or so of setting baseline data and gathering data over time. We will report back to the planning board and the city council, and both of those entities would have the opportunity to recommend further text amendments to change or update the regulations if there were unintended consequences.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Andrew, we had a question from Facebook, and it says, are limits based solely on square footage?
They are not now, and they would not be moving forward. There is not a minimum house size in Denver or a minimum square feet per person requirement in a Denver house. The housing code, which is separate from the zoning code, does have basic requirements for functioning kitchens, heating, windows, that sort of thing, but or ventilation, but it does not have there's not a minimum size or space required per person, and that would remain the case if these amendments were adopted as shown here on this slide. We may, and we're continuing that conversation with City Council, explore opportunities for allowing additional unrelated people or people to live in a mixed relationship household in larger households. And in that case, if something like that is adopted for just those larger households, which would be with a separate larger household use permit, we would regulate that based on a HUD recommendation of 200 square feet per person, but that's not actually a requirement in any code here in Denver now.
Okay, I have another question, and I know we've talked about this a couple times, and I've actually pulled the data. So Mark, who lives near Regis, says that there are numerous homes rented by more than 4 or 5 unrelated people. It might be illegal, but it's done, and no one enforced the regulations. So is this being done for some other reason, like a specific purpose for this, the group living update?
Well, let me unpack that. So it is probably true that, and data we've looked at in terms of at least 311 calls does show more of those near universities, and I live right near DU, and certainly there's a higher rate of those types of complaints in my neighborhood as well. We essentially we accept that people live differently than they did when these regulations were created in the 1950s, and that people the concept of people living in nuclear families has evolved, and we're making the case that it is not equitable to say that only people who are related to each other and are in nuclear families can live in houses in Denver. So we are not really aiming these proposed changes at any particular population, but more generally we're saying, looking at, especially when compared to other cities or other peer cities, that we think that it would be a more equitable approach, and an approach that would also help people have more flexible options for housing, to allow more unrelated people to live together who function no differently than a related family or do in a household.
Okay.
Andrew, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that enforcement. We've got a couple of questions about, yeah, sorry to jump in there.
No, and Councilwoman Sandoval, you kind of asked about that too, and I didn't answer that part of the question. We do enforce on these issues, and if you've watched the Ludi hearings recently or some of our other presentations, it is, it varies by year, but there are typically maybe 100 or so cases opened per year. related to, where people have called 311 or used the app to report a house that they believe has too many unrelated adults living in it. And for each of those cases, our inspectors go and they open a case and they ask people about their relationships. And if they have to, they ask for copies of leases and that sort of thing, or proof of relationships. And when there is a violation, the city inspectors try very hard not to kick people out of housing. And so they always start with trying to bring people into compliance, whether it's going through the process of getting a home occupation permit for one roommate. But if you have more than one roommate, then somebody typically has to move out. And it does happen. About half of the 311 calls annually turn out to actually be violations of the code. And those are resolved in a number of ways that can include people having to move out of the house. And I will just note that right now, CPD, in response to requests from the governor and from the CDC, has made enforcement of related and unrelated households its lowest priority. So we are not actively enforcing specifically on number of adults in a household right now, as much as we are focusing on external impacts around, yard parking and maintenance, that sort of thing, trying to really solve what is actually a problem for the community without putting people out of housing.
Thank you. And to Mark, I know you can hear me. I have some data that we pulled on, because I live near Regis as well. So I was very interested, where in Council District 1 were we getting the complaints for more than 3 people living together? So if you'd like to reach out to me directly, I'll put my email in the chat. I'm sure you know it, so we can share some of that information. I think that a lot of times there's complaints, and then the individuals, as Andrew mentioned, they become compliant, and someone ultimately ends up moving out and end up with 3 people. So there was another question from Facebook that mentioned that the presentation that you gave just now, Andrew, and the presentation that we received on October 6th, there weren't as many as alternatives in this presentation as were presented to council. Is that correct?
Good eye, whoever that was. That is correct. We, in the interest of trying to, make this presentation fit in the allotted time, we took out some of the alternatives that we're not hearing a lot of support for at this point.
Okay.
Great, thank you. We have a question about the off-street parking requirement, and from Pete, who is interested about the fact that, wondering if requiring off-street parking might be detrimental to the goal of providing more housing, if it would potentially raise the cost to build houses, having to build new additional parking could be expensive, and I think it's, I mentioned that a parking spot's generally the size of a bedroom. So I think it's a really interesting question. Have you any thoughts about that?
It's a great question. So typically a parking space, and it can just be a parking space, an outdoor space, and right now the zoning code has a lot coverage maximum for all uses in all zone districts. And so in a single unit or SU zone district, there's a certain percentage of your property that you can cover with structures, and the rest has to be left as open space. And that open space can be used for surface parking, for off-street parking. And so requiring an outdoor an uncovered parking space would not necessarily cut into an area of the property that could conceivably be used for a structure or a bedroom, because there is that required unbuilt area. However, I think we would agree with the point that requiring parking is not something that we are, we are proposing that in response to concerns that we've heard about parking. and a perceived or a fear of shortage of on-street parking in the public right-of-way. So we are proposing a minimum off-street parking requirement for larger households if the council ultimately decides to move forward with allowing those larger households. But in general, I would say that most of our work aims to ensure space for people rather than for the storage of cars. So this is this is a compromise as we try to strike a balance between our goals and the feedback that we're hearing from the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing I would like to mention is for the alternatives that Andrew has mentioned, if you would like to put those in the chat, so you would like to ping me and tell me which ones you would like to consider and think are a good compromise to what the original amendment was. That was something that I'd really like to gain feedback from this town hall, is to also figure out what my constituents think of the proposals that are coming forward from CPD as a compromise. And again, if you are joining us on Facebook Live, we are going over we are hosting a town hall to talk about the group living text amendment coming before council. And Andrew Webb, our project manager, is giving us an update. Take it from here, Naomi.
Great, thanks so much. I think that we should probably move on to our next topic, which is the residential or group care, residential care. And please, if you still do have questions about that first topic about household living, if one of yours didn't get answered, continue to put them in the chat or on Facebook. We will do our very best to answer anything that didn't get answered here and connect you at least with the people that can give you the right answers. But so in the interest of time, we'll move on to our second topic, which is, take it away, Andrew, and then we'll have Q&A after that. And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps.
Great, well, thank you. So what I'll do is I'll summarize what we're proposing in general for residential care, and then I'll focus a little bit more on the details of community corrections, because I know that's an issue that is of particular interest to the community. So residential care is a use that currently exists in the zoning code, and I should be clear that nearly all residential care use types are already allowed in all zone districts that allow residential uses of any type. So for example, in a single unit or SU zone district, the zoning code already permits uses like assisted living, nursing homes, transitional housing, sober living, rehabilitation type facilities, and to a lesser extent, some types of shelters in areas with single unit and 2 unit and other low intensity residential zoning. And cities are required to do that by both the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Colorado State Group Home Statute, which does require municipalities to accommodate homes where people are provided care by professional staff. So when we went to the planning board, we proposed to update our current regulations for residential care uses to do a few things. One, the key proposal is to consolidate all uses where care is provided into a single use type, simply residential care, and then regulate those facilities by size and scale rather than by the type of care provided or the housing status of residents. The zoning code is not really intended to regulate different types of people, and the current code identifies some populations, most notably community corrections or halfway house uses, and to a lesser extent shelter type uses, and only allows those in most cases in higher intensity or industrial zone districts where the residents lack access to day-to-day needs. Those regulations date back many years and are rooted in fear and bias, and while perhaps not intending to have the effect of concentrating our most vulnerable populations in areas where people in areas near the most underserved neighborhoods and where residents lack access to their daily needs. We also want to encourage the more equitable distribution of residential care facilities citywide. We are proposing, I mentioned up front that we have currently a complicated and confusing notification system. We want to replace that with one system for all residential care use types that would require an upfront community meeting prior to application for a zoning permit, where the operator would have to meet with the community and explain who they are and what they're planning to do. And that would be for any larger facility, any facility serving 11 or more people, or any facility that would serve non-paroled individuals, which is how we refer to essentially people who are in a community corrections type setting. We are also strengthening and clarifying our current requirements for spacing between facilities, as well as the density limitations, which limit the number of facilities that can cumulatively exist in a given area. So I'm going to skip a slide here and jump real quick to a couple of I just froze my slide deck. There we go. Just very quickly, a couple of maps that explain spacing and density, so it's easier to understand. So this is sorry. Well, the slide that was just up shows how the spacing requirements would work in a hypothetical scenario where a site is proposed for a new residential care facility. There we go. I think it'll stay here now. A site is proposed for a new residential care facility. A spacing requirement means that we have to measure in a geographic information or GIS system the distance between the subject site and existing residential care uses nearby. And if the site is far enough away, meets whatever the zoning code requirement is, then it can be permitted. But if it's within that spacing area, it would not be allowed. And then when we talk about density, that works a little bit differently. So we are proposing to require that within a 1 mile radius of a subject site, no more than 3 other residential care uses can exist. If the subject site is the one that's shown on this hypothetical map here, there are only 3 facilities within that 1 mile radius of that site, so essentially 2 miles across. So that site could be permitted, but if that site, subject site, was moved slightly to the north or to the southwest, then there would be more site and more existing facilities nearby, and so a density standard has the cumulative effect of precluding concentration of residential care facilities in any one area of the city. So, and just to highlight, the spacing and density requirements are sensitive to the context, the location. The spacing requirements are lower in our highest intensity mixed use and multi-unit districts, and the requirements are higher in the lowest intensity residential districts like single unit and 2 unit. So the City Council has reviewed what we proposed and what was recommended by the Planning Board, and have highlighted a few concerns that they have. And so we are proposing some potential revisions for what is proposed for residential care, and they are shown on this slide. We were proposing, in response to concerns that we've heard about community corrections uses, specifically in single unit and 2 unit zone districts, the lowest intensity residential districts. We are proposing a possible revision that would preclude that type of use, would prohibit the serving of non-paroled individuals in those zone districts. And then for facilities that serve 10 or fewer guests, the smallest facilities, we've heard some concerns about the ongoing concentration of those facilities on one street or in one neighborhood. And so we're proposing a couple of possible approaches for that for the council to consider that would include either a spacing requirement, like I just showed, between facilities, or a density limitation that would allow two facilities perhaps to be next to each other, as currently happens in some cases, pardon me, or but would not allow over time additional facilities to be within a 1 mile radius of that area. And then for the type 2 facilities, kind of the second tier of residential care facilities, we've heard concerns about those larger facilities being allowed in single unit zone districts. And so we're looking at a couple of possible revisions to address that. One would be to either reduce the size of those types of facilities. Currently, residential care uses serving up to 20 people are permitted in single and 2 unit zone districts. So we could ratchet this the threshold for type 2 facilities back from 40 to 20 guests. We've also proposed for the council's consideration only allowing those types of facilities and structures that have previously been used and were built for some civic, public, or institutional use, so essentially not a house. And so that would not allow these larger facilities serving 11 or more people in houses on residential streets at all. The next few slides, if I can get this to work more reliably here, we'll go into some specifics about community corrections, because I know that has been of particular interest. So again, just a quick review of the current spacing requirements and density requirements for residential care facility and community corrections compared to what is proposed. There is currently a 2,000-foot spacing requirement between facilities. We are proposing 12,000 feet or 3 blocks, which is comparable to peer cities and is more based on some rational measurement rather than the arbitrary 2,000 feet. And then we are expanding the density limitation from the current 4,000 feet to 1 mile. Seeking to match that up generally with the average width of a typical Denver statistical neighborhood. So currently, community corrections facilities are allowed in the places that you can see there in tan. Existing facilities are shown, they're the black squares with their spacing and density limitation buffers shown illustrated around them. So the areas in tan are where new facilities could currently be permitted. And I should just note that where the gray circle falls over one of those tan areas, an analysis would have to be done about whether or not there is already an existing density of facilities nearby. So that leaves it currently about 3,000 acres or about 1,200 parcels where it's conceivable that one of these uses could be established, all of which are in areas of the city that already have a concentration of such uses and where other residential care uses are also concentrated. This is what we proposed when we went to the planning board. This would allow these uses in any zone district that allows other residential care uses. Essentially would treat community corrections no different from any other residential care use. And the existing facilities, again, are shown here with the updated spacing and density requirements illustrated. And then based on what we've heard from city council members and community members, the concern about a community corrections facility located right in a residential neighborhood, we have proposed as a possible revision for the council's consideration, not allowing these in single and 2 unit zone districts. So kind of ratcheting back from what we'd originally proposed to say if it's a single or 2 unit zone district, then a community corrections use serving non-paroled individuals would not be permitted. Just to highlight a few things about community corrections, it's a fairly slow growing and very highly regulated industry. Most of the current facilities are operated by private companies, or in a couple cases nonprofits that partner with the city and with the State Department of Corrections. we've looked at and we've worked with Department of Safety to review crime data from the last decade, and there is not a record of any property or violent crime occurring near existing facilities that can be attributed to a resident of a facility or the presence of a facility. And so these are, as I mentioned, a very highly regulated use with a lot of city and state standards that must be met, frequent reporting, 24-hour security. But we do hear the concerns from community members about this particular type of facility right in neighborhoods. I should note that some of the existing facilities, most of them actually do already exist in or near neighborhoods. But so the alternative that I showed a couple slides back is one way that we think the council might consider revising this approach if they believe that it is important to preclude these uses from the lowest intensity zone districts. So that was my last slide on residential care, and so I'll go back from next steps here, and we'll have some Q&A about residential care.
Thanks, Andrew. That was a great presentation, and I appreciate the efficiency of you going through it. So we do have a couple questions coming in.
Great.
And one was, is there a rationale for having, is there a rationale for having some of these facilities close together, meaning for access to services or something like that? So that was one of the questions. It was earlier in your presentation.
Yeah, and so it's a great question. There are currently limitations on how close these facilities can be together. I think that the person asking is probably correct, that there may be some efficiencies that could be gained by having facilities in close proximity, ability to share programming, but generally speaking, these facilities already do have limited spacing requirements between them. There are two facilities that are right next to each other here at Fort Logan, but the rest have at least some spacing in between them. But it's certainly, your point is well taken, that we use these standards, and it is common for zoning codes to require spacing between residential care type facilities, and that is out of a concern for the overconcentration of facilities that could keep the people who live in residential care facilities from benefiting from the feeling of community, and instead almost living in an area that is sort of institutionalized. And so there are a lot of reasons why cities do typically require some spacing between facilities.
Great. So I think there was some confusion. We have one of the questions saying that the regulations need to be tighter than single family or duplex. So in row home specifically, he called out row home. So are row homes so that shaded yellow area, there are no row home. Is that including row homes?
This does not include, this does not include row home zone districts. And that's certainly something we'd really be interested in your feedback and the community's feedback. Row house zone districts, many of them already allow the apartment building form, for example, and other more intensive uses. And so in what we've currently, or what we've showed Ludi so far, has not included prohibiting these facilities in row house zone districts.
Okay, and then just some feedback. One person said, I support the original proposal to treat community correction facilities the same as other kinds of residential care facilities and not excluding them from single or 2-unit zoning. I have lived near shelters and homes for returning citizens and was not aware of any impact on crime or other community issues. Another person spoke up and said they agree with that person. So just wanted to give you some feedback of what's happening in the chat. Community corrections facility. So one other person asked, would not this slide, but the former slide of the proposal, is that include in triplex and fourplexes? I'm not quite sure how to answer that question.
Yeah, so this map shows where the permitted areas for community corrections uses would be if they were not allowed in single and 2-unit zone districts. And so where areas where triplexes and fourplexes are allowed are in typically multi-unit or MU zone districts, which would be allowed and which are shown here. So areas that are currently have MU zoning, those types of uses would be allowed in those districts.
Thank you. We have had a question that came up a little bit before then of what is anticipated to be the demand for more community corrections facilities in the future? And I know that we've had some presentations at Ludi from experts in this area. So what have we been hearing?
Yeah, and so I certainly would defer those specific questions to Department of Safety, and I can circle back to you with some of their input. But generally speaking, and I think many of your constituents are probably aware that the City Council is moving away from the current private prison operators that run several of the facilities here in the city. You can see them on this table. Those facilities that are operated by Core Civic, and then there are a couple others that are operated by the Geo Group. The City Council has acted last year to not contract with those companies anymore, and a separate advisory committee set out some priorities for smaller, more therapeutic community corrections uses these are fairly large scale, the ones that currently exist. And so it is, as Department of Safety told Ludi last week, it's difficult to predict demand, especially because it also depends on changes in the justice system and policies around moving people out of prison settings and that sort of thing. But there is certainly always demand in the city for space for people who have been approved into a community corrections program but do not have an open bed. And right now, as we move away from some of these existing larger scale facilities, I think Department of Safety is hoping to see some additional smaller, more distributed facilities, hopefully in areas where people have access to transit and jobs, because when people who are in these facilities typically do go to leave the facility to go to jobs and that sort of thing, and so. Can't speak, I can't give specific numbers on demand, but I'll circle back with some additional information from Department of Safety on that.
Thank you so much. So we actually have someone who has raised their hand who is a caller. So it's a 303-477-5665 number. I'm going to press this button here that will hopefully allow you to talk, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. All right. I believe if you press *3, you should be able to unmute yourself and be able to talk. And if that doesn't work, you can try *6. All right. Oh, yes, it worked.
I think that worked.
It worked. We hear you. Great.
We hear you. Fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have a couple of remarks about the. I noticed from your presentation about the placement and rules on siting and location of group homes, especially community corrections facilities. You seem to be responsive to concerns which I have expressed and other neighbors have expressed. And if the council recognizes and enacts the revisions you've suggested, I think that will be beneficial. I think that will assist in increasing the equity of the placement of those facilities. I do have questions and remarks that I won't state now because I didn't get to ask them during your presentation on the household sizes. And I won't ask them now, but I'll just mention that you talked about the behavior of people who need housing or would be in housing. I'm interested in the behavior of slumlords. That's another kind of person who is present in the city, and I'm afraid may find additional incentives for their activities due to the changes you're proposing. And I'm concerned that this will be very difficult to control. But that's all I have to say on that subject. And thank you for allowing me to ask this question.
Thank you, Keith, for participating. And if you want to email the question that you have, since you're calling in, you know how to get a hold of me, and I'll make sure to get that over to Andrew, and we'll make sure to get you an answer. And thank you for being respectful of the time. I really always appreciate that.
I will ask it. When I moved to Sunnyside in 1993, we had a lot of absentee landlords operating slum properties, and Denver has, I understand, quite a large percentage of residential property which is owned by absentees, and not even in the state. These people have different interests from those of us who actually live here, and it's very difficult to control their behavior. I'm concerned that the new rules may offer them opportunities for profit making, which won't benefit the city or the neighborhoods. And I really think you haven't addressed this subject yet. Or if you have, I would like to have that information. So I know this is off topic, so I will now hang up. But yes, I will email this question to you, Gina.
It's Amanda, Keith, but thank you.
Amanda, I'm sorry, Amanda.
I know Gina emailed you the link, so thanks for joining us, but it's Amanda. That's how I knew your voice. Okay, so I think there's a couple other questions here. Tim from a neighbor of ours said, just for clarity, the URH 2.5 districts do not allow apartments forms. It's URH 3A that do allow apartments forms on corner lots on collectors or arterial streets. So just for some clarification, that was thrown out there.
Great. And I have another question, maybe to dig in a little bit more about the potential, the suggestion that potentially community corrections would be excluded from single unit and 2 unit zoning. So just to clarify, the other proposals about group residential care, it's all based kind of on impact of size. Is that correct?
That is correct. So yes, as we proposed, all these regulations would be based just on the size of the facility.
But the proposal is, I think, that something about the content, the quality of community corrections is something that people are struggling with, aside from size. So regardless of size, community corrections wouldn't be allowed in SU and TU. Is that the proposal?
That is correct. That is the possible alternative or revision that we have set forth for the council to consider, which as the commenter observes, would be a departure from how we have proposed to regulate residential care in general. But we're trying to be responsive to the concerns people have about that particular type of use, specifically in neighborhood.
Yeah, definitely. I think this particular part, I know we have portions of Jefferson Park, portions of Highland that are multi-unit, that are not single unit and 2 unit. And we've been hearing from them as well, that this idea kind of concerns them. And so I know that this isn't a proposal that's coming from you, but do you have a sense of what is it about the quality of community corrections that, maybe to flip it, rather than saying, what is it that doesn't make it appropriate to 2 unit and single unit, what makes it appropriate to have that in a multi-unit context? Why does it fit there? Because that's also essentially what the suggestion is saying.
Yeah. So um, in multi-unit zone districts typically allow generally speaking, a higher intensity of uses, and are also found closer to commercial corridors, or even higher intensity mixed use areas of the city are typically, buffered from single unit zone districts by multi-unit districts. And so these larger scale residential uses tend to kind of blend in a little bit more in those places when there is already a large population of people, an additional population that some people may perceive as undesirable seems less frightening, I think, is what it boils down to. And so our mixed use and multi-unit zone districts already do allow an array of residential uses and larger residential care uses than are currently allowed in the single unit and 2-unit districts. So essentially the scale of those facilities tends to blend in a little bit more seamlessly in higher intensity zone districts, where there is already taller buildings, more people living, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And but also to dive in even further, it's not so much about scale as the use, right? Because maybe I should ask, what size are these community, like how many guests do these community corrections tend to serve? Like what kind of sizes are we looking at?
Yeah, so most of the existing facilities serve between, the smallest ones. There's the Fillmore House, you can see there at kind of Colfax and Fillmore. And then one that has closed was the William Street Center that was just slightly to the north and west of that existing facility, right there in the middle of the map below City Park. Those facilities served about 40 people each. But the rest of the existing facilities serve between, say, 50 to 90. And then there's, I believe, one large facility that serves up to 120. And so those larger facilities serving a number of guests that at that scale would still only be allowed in the highest intensity zone districts. The idea, though, is to allow smaller facilities in hopes of encouraging and allowing for more therapeutic, more community-based options for these reentry programs in zone districts where residents can be in the communities that ultimately they will be coming back to, whether they go through a community corrections program or not.
Great, thanks for that explanation. That was really interesting.
Sure.
All right, let's see. Got any more questions?
No, I don't see any other questions.
More questions.
Me neither. But I will ask, Andrew, is there on one of your slides, is there, besides having these like town hall Zoom conferences, are you hosting one-on-one what am I looking for? One-on-one.
Office hours.
Office hours. That's it. That's the word I was looking for. Are
Yes.
you offering office hours?
We are, yes. Thanks for that, and thank you for doing this open house. And I think a few other council members have expressed interest in this as well, and we're happy to do these as we're available. But we also do regularly hold office hours on Thursday. They alternate between afternoons and evenings. So tomorrow night we have an evening session, and then the following Thursday a daytime. Well, not the following Thursday, actually, I believe is the holiday week, so we won't have one that week. But through December, we have them scheduled back and forth, afternoons and evenings on Thursdays, and people can go to our project website here on this page to sign up for those. And they are an opportunity for people to come and sit down in a smaller group discussion and ask questions. And we've had some really interesting discussions in those, and I highly urge anybody who hasn't come to one before to join one. They're really interesting. We get a real wide range of perspectives, and it's a good opportunity for people to have kind of a discussion around the table with their neighbors.
Great. So we have one last request, Andrew. Are you able to forward me the slide deck so then we can share them with the participants who attended this evening?
I sure will. Yeah, and I, a few things I was going to put in the chat, but I actually can't see the chat because I'm sharing here. But so I will email you this deck as well as some other useful links about some of the other things we talked about as soon as I'm off.
Great. And just so some feedbacks, someone says this is an awesome session and they thank us for hosting this so that we can get community feedback. So just want you to know, and I appreciate your steadfast leadership on this. I know it's not easy to go into community and hold space where people can have respectful discourse, have these hard conversations, because when you talk about someone's house and you talk about someone's home, you're going to probably get some really heated discussions. And I know that you have given this, you've always just given facts and you haven't really interjected your opinions on things. And you've always been really available to myself and my staff. So I really appreciate that, Andrew. I know that you've been working on this project for a long time. And so for next steps, everyone who's watching, I'm open to hearing any feedback. So you can email me at districtone@denvergov.org. And they're coming back to City Council land use in December. And then I think we will have a final vote to move it out of committee on December 22nd, I believe is the date for our land use committee. And then it will go to the full body. So it's not done once it moves out of land use, but we've been there since October. So the chair, Councilman Herndon, feels like it'd behoove us to move this on to the full body so all council members could vote on it. And with that, thank you so much for your participation, Andrew. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Manny. Thank you, Gina. I can't do any of this without my staff. Everyone, I get to have the title, but really it's my staff that makes the magic happen. So thank you all for joining us and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.